Hello, Doris. Hello, Scott.
Hello.
Nice entrance. I thought it was your day off.
We thought you were a burglar.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. I am joined by Matt Hooper, who is the writer and creator of Live from Tomorrow. Thanks for joining, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It's a thrill.
All right. You talk about something called innovation theater. What is that?
Well, it's a term that I learned from a founder back when I was on the corporate innovation team at a large investment bank in New York. The term was first introduced to me in a pejorative manner. It was, are we really innovating here? Do the biggest companies in the world want to actually innovate, or is it all a bunch of innovation theater? And as someone who is currently promoting, having authored a podcast musical about innovation in tech and business, it felt like by addressing innovation theater and kind of subverting that idea, this is theater about innovation, allows us to have a conversation about what actually qualifies as innovation, sure, and also, performance with innovation as the main theme of the content.
Yeah, so having been on this corporate side, and of course you've actually run innovation for Barclays, how do you reconcile the fact that many corporate entities and multinationals use innovation more as a marketing ploy than actual real hardcore strategy and product development?
Sure. Well, just to be clear, I wasn't running innovation at Barclays. I was on the innovation team, and that's a way of also saying that anything can really only happen, I guess, in the field of innovation if you have the right stakeholders, if you have the right people invested. We had a really terrific team. This is my 3rd year of running my current business, and all of my clients are very, very large corporations, where I've also seen how their innovation teams work. And I would say that, unless there's buy-in, unless there's really an incentive to want to push the envelope, want to be a little more imaginative, innovation can't happen. It's a very tricky thing to measure, right? How do you measure something new? Is it that it's going to lead you to a new line of business? Is it that it's going to save cost? What is innovation success? What does innovation success look like in your business? And so the most successful innovation use cases I've come across are when it's not just that everybody's on board; it's that there's real incentive for corporate colleagues to work with startups, to change the way they do business, to adopt new products. I mean, whatever the goal is, it's when everybody's all agreed on what to achieve and what that goal is, and that they're all going to achieve it. And again, just to bring it full circle, without the right incentives, I don't know that any of that's possible.
So let's briefly talk about some of the incentives that you've seen that appear to work a little bit better than maybe other incentive structures that are out there.
Sure. I'm going to give real credit to something that we were not able to implement while I was still on the corporate side, which is my manager used to suggest that we tie people's bonuses to how often they interface with an innovative team. And in that case, innovative teams meant startups. A lot of my experience, because before I ever stepped into a corporation as an employee, I was working with them as a founder. I mean, I came out of the New York City startup ecosystem. And so my favorite innovation memories and how I sort of think of the innovation ecosystem from my vantage point is one that consists of collaborations between corporates and startups, right? Sort of Goliath-sized companies and David-sized companies. And the incentive, I loved that idea he used to suggest. So full credit to him for saying, how do you tie folks' bonuses to X number of hours, Y number of days spent with the startup. But I've also seen the corporate accelerator model up close and personal work really, really well. Notably, the Techstars accelerator model has done a really fantastic job working with corporations. I can speak to that because, again, I was on the corporate side of a Techstars accelerator relationship. And that model, which sort of really took off in the mid-10s. I mean, we saw startup accelerators of the more traditional venture model structure take flight in like 2010, 2011, 2012. But by 2015, which is when I, in my particular case, joined Barclays, but also started to work with as a mentor and advisor to a number of other corporate accelerators. That was because about halfway through the decade, a lot of corporates woke up and realized that was a successful model. Now, I'm not sure that in 2025, we'll be talking about corporate accelerators as the future anymore. But in terms of the successful startup corporate collaborations, the successful innovation opportunities, it was and has been up until this point a very successful way of connecting not just corporates and startups, but kind of bridging the culture gap too. Because in an accelerator structure, your goal is to grow and launch specifically successful companies in X number of weeks, over roughly 3 months, depending on the program. And that creates, for better and for worse, we're all in it together structure and a pretty sort of limited time frame to get something done. And that's a really cool way of, I think, bringing everybody into the same problems, trying to work to solve. I guess I should say, trying to work to solve the same problems, corporate and startup alike.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point. Is that there was definitely kind of a zenith in terms of the relevancy and the importance of accelerators.
Yep.
But looking more forward, is that the right model that's going to bridge that innovation gap between corporates versus the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say this is a conversation I have for fun. Like, this is what's next in corporate innovation is a conversation I often find myself in with friends and colleagues alike. I have too many people I love in the accelerator ecosystem still running these programs to say that it's not working, both out of an allegiance to the model because it does empirically work and because some folks are doing really brilliant work. I think that the great missing link, and this is entirely anecdotal, and there are folks far, far, far smarter, shrewder, and more thoughtful about this than I am. But again, in my own personal experience, the idea that an entrepreneurial culture needs to exist and to work alongside an entrepreneurial culture is the best way to foster anything. And so I have found that like one-on-one development workshops and design thinking sessions with corporate colleagues are often as effective at introducing an innovation mindset as having any executive work with a startup through an accelerator program. And I would be very interested in seeing over the next half decade if that continues, particularly in a new world where I'm not sure how many folks are going to be going to offices anymore, right? We've entered the age of social distancing. So as we rethink what is very broadly and popularly called the future of work, we can also think about how entrepreneurial culture can really take flight and how it can sort of rest alongside entrepreneurial culture, collaborate successfully with entrepreneurial culture, and be rewarded like entrepreneurial culture by management teams.
Yeah, I've had a guest in the past that have expressed using empirical studies that much of the innovation that we think of, from a private sector, really comes from entrepreneurs and extrapreneurs, external parties, and it's really about harnessing the internal talent pool to actually mobilize that. Now, Goldman Sachs.
Sure, and if I may, that's because of domain expertise, right? Like nobody knows your business unit's challenges as well as you do if you're working within a giant organization, in theory, right? So that makes perfect sense.
With that said, I am hesitant to mention the company name, but there are those that are focusing inwardly than outwardly, but yet from kind of a prioritization and approval process, it still kind of gets caught up in this, key executive stakeholder that's willing to put their PO or budget line item to it. what are your thoughts around that? And what are some organizational barriers that corporate and brands need to overcome to make some of this new evolution work better?
I think recognizing that I used to joke, particularly when I was working at a large organization, that there were like internal celebrities. There were only the folks that people in the organization cared about and nobody on the outside cared about. I think there needs to be recognition across corporation after corporation that everybody on the outside, right, your customers, folks that are discovering whatever your latest musings are on LinkedIn, et cetera, are thinking about you all the time. And so I think that internal politics can be the biggest barrier to entry for any sort of innovative idea. I can say that one of the most successful collaborations I've experienced with the corporate has been my experience working with IBM as the host of the IBM Blockchain Pulse podcast, which we've been doing now for over a year, and is entirely because there are very forward-thinking folks on the IBM blockchain marketing team that recognize that having a conversation just alongside their colleagues about blockchain successes within IBM is not enough. They're having a number of successful collaborations, JVs that are being produced, really cool client stories, and they know the way to share that with the world is by highlighting it, promoting it, and sort of stepping outside of their of not just their comfort zone, but very literally their walls, right? I mean, outside the conversation that would only take place in IBM by hiring someone like me who's not an IBM employee. And I that's what I have lately taken to calling innovation storytelling, right? It's telling the story of innovation to a broader audience. But to very succinctly, ideally answer your question, if you're not telling an innovation story to the broadest audience possible, that's the biggest barrier to entry, is you're just talking to yourself, you're just talking to colleagues, and in that way, you're kind of just chasing your own tail.
So let's talk about that storytelling model. And you talk about running a art project like a startup. And of course, for today, we're really talking about your is it Live from Tomorrow?
Yeah.
And how you guys are about to launch the podcast form of this, right?
For sure.
I think, part of your success, aside from just really well done execution on the production side, is really incorporating things like comedy, humor, as well as just the different kind of music ensemble. So tell us about kind of, all the little pieces that's necessary to build and tell great stories.
Sure, thank you. The idea of running your art project, or in this case, like full podcast series, like a startup, it comes out of the idea that every single piece of what is now a completed audio story started based on validating it with who we thought our target customers were. Right? We sort of found the right customer segment for this show. We determined that there was a subsection of the business audience that was hungry for something more lighthearted. And then we tested a number of segments for that audience. Now, what does that mean practically? Live from Tomorrow is an epic musical comedy about innovation in business and tech. It's sort of like the Producers meets Gimlet's famous startup podcast, but it wasn't always a narrative audio series. It was very literally a variety show, much more in the sort of, we used to joke that it was like SNL meets Shark Tank, and that it was a bunch of sketches with a real startup pitch competition at the end of it. The startup pitch competition eventually became a game show, and we did some pre-taped segments, like showed videos during the middle of a live performance, as well as live musical performances. And this was done over about 3.5 years as first a meetup, then an actual business, and finally a corporate sponsored opportunity. Our biggest show, in fact, was done with, again, the support of the IBM blockchain team. It was called Blockchain on Broadway. And we very literally rented out a theater in the heart of Times Square last year and did a big variety show there. The evolution from a variety show into a scripted series, though, was a startup-like transition. And what I mean by that is, we saw what segments were working. So, for example, personally, while I really liked the game show, I knew and saw that our audience's attention was waning. It was a less popular segment, while original songs, parody songs, non-parody songs, and scripted bits, which are sort of how I knew that a story was possible, right? Sort of fictional segments, those were incredibly popular, as were interviews with real thought leaders and innovators. So by leaning into, yes, interviews and scripted segments and music, and sort of pulling away from the more quote unquote reality TV game show style segments, like a very literal game show or like the startup pitch competition, we perfected the new format of the show. And that felt to me like a pretty traditional startup trajectory, even though it's all about content, as unusual as that sounds, in that it was just a lot of trial and error, a lot of testing, a lot of staying lean, and only responding to data as provided to us by our audience. I wasn't really doing things, however excited I was about any given creative idea, I was mostly listening to what was appealing to the folks that have been loyal to us and come to see our live shows over the years.
Yeah, what I really like about what you're sharing is that you kept it very lightweight. So using meetups as an example, without committing too many resources or formalizing into a legal entity, you're using that as a way to navigate and kind of perfect that market fit. And once you had reasonable market fit, you iterated, sharpen, and again allowing that data to inform and direct and guide to the point where now it's a it's a full out enterprise of business.
Yeah, exactly. You said it. Thank you for saying it so much more articulately than I could have, because it is an unusual thing to say. I'm gonna, the idea of honing comedy in the first place is trial and error, right? Does this make someone laugh? Is this working? Are the order of the jokes making sense? Is the timing right here? So that's very entrepreneurial in and of itself. Just sort of separately, right? That creative process, the creative process of perfecting something that's funny. The other piece of it, though, was a leap in format. And even though I'm thinking of it as a natural evolution in my own entrepreneurial journey, it is unusual to say we're going to stop doing a live variety style performance and turn it into a scripted audio series, right? A narrative series. Now, I sort of pinch myself because I feel lucky as a business owner that we have turned this into a podcast, because as of the timing of your and my conversation right now, we're all still practicing social distancing. I mean, there is no real live event market just yet. Well, our show can still reach, tens of thousands of people, hopefully many more than that, because it's available on all podcast platforms. That was a lucky iteration. But last year, when my collaborators and I decided to move from live variety to narrative audio, it was only with the confidence of seeing the evolution of the show, not necessarily because we knew that like narrative musical podcasts were the wave of the future or something, and not because we thought like this is a surefire hit and what everybody secretly wants are lots of songs about tech that they can listen to as they go about their business.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was more than maybe even a decade ago that Bill Gates had predicted that something that was going to really cripple not just the US, but around the world was some sort of a pandemic, a viral infection of some sort. And surely enough, we're in the midst of that. And it's very interesting because, even when a viable vaccine emerges out of, 3 dozen different paths that are out there, I think there are going to be remnants of social distancing, and certainly I think a lot of the working remotely has become much more acceptable and permissible, especially on a corporate setting. So you're right that, yes, there's always going to be that format for live events, but I think people are learning to navigate into more of the online and virtual relational as well as the communal aspect. And the dissemination of content through podcasts is becoming incredibly popular. As we see that, from a sector, the growth rate is much higher than any other forms of communication.
Particularly, excellent point, and particularly vis-a-vis the business audience that we're going after. I mean, so many of the same folks that were buying tickets to the live show are, the show has only been out for a day, so I hope this trend continues, but there is an overlap between the folks that came to see us live and those that might be consuming this as a podcast. Podcasts are a particularly effective way of reaching the business audience. The other thing that has just changed, tremendously is I've been joking lately that because the show takes place last year, as 2018 turned into 2019, in some ways it feels like a period piece. That was both 1 year and 1,000 years ago, given the way that the world is changing right now. And so the sort of meta narrative of a guy with Yes, My Name, Matt Hooper, quitting his job at Yes, a bank to launch a variety show called Yes, Live from Tomorrow, while an amusing meta entrepreneurial journey, is sort of tied to that period of time. But I think that the themes are not, like, even though the very first scene of the show does take place in a coffee shop, back when we could all still gather in a coffee shop, the themes of launching your dreams, right, and making them a reality, are ideally timeless. So that's been another interesting thing that I don't know that we would have ever had to confront had we not entered this very new, strange period of history.
Terrific. Well, we're running up on our end time here. We have about maybe 30 seconds. Can you give us kind of a quick summary of what makes Live from Tomorrow so unique, and what's the value proposition for your current audience, but also potential new listeners?
Thank you. Yeah, Live from Tomorrow is the only musical comedy about the most important issues of our time, whether it's digital currency, the climate crisis, the future of work, and how it's being upended by automation. We try to take on the biggest business themes and technology's role in the new business realities that we'll be facing, and put it into the context of a very gripping story that will ideally make you laugh, teach you something, and introduce you to a cast of characters that you'll come to care about.
That's terrific. And the last question we always ask is, can you share a product or project failure and the lessons learned from it that you can share with others?
Absolutely. I started my very first company just out of college, and pretty much didn't listen to a single instinct that I had over the course of those 2 years that would have, I think, allowed for a more successful experience. And what I mean by that is deep fear, deep anxiety, and first-time founder moments of self-flagellation led to too many pivots and not enough work with real data and not enough work with real feedback, so that by the time I was 24 and the business was coming to an end, I thought my career was over. I mean, I really was exhausted, and I thought that I would never be able to launch anything again or be able to continue to work in the tech ecosystem, because it just wasn't for me. That was what I had decided. I couldn't have been more wrong. And through having an open mind and sort of an open heart, I guess, is what I look back and decide that was what I was capable of keeping open at that time. And through some really, really brilliant friends and colleagues, I was able to land on my feet and begin another job and kind of work my way up for the rest of my career. But I would say the biggest failure was not trusting my instincts at particularly vulnerable times. And I think that so many founders run into that problem. But the reason you're starting that business in the first place is by and large because you really don't know it all, and you don't know what tomorrow can bring, but you probably have pretty good instincts. if you're someone who has managed to build a following, some traction, and a team around you. So I would say that for any founder, especially a first-time founder, that was the thing that really tripped me up, and definitely a lesson that I learned, and something that's clearly stayed with me in the 8 years since that journey, that particular part of my journey, came to an end.
So learning to trust yourself in difficult times. So with that, I've been joined by Matt Hooper, who is the writer and creator of Live from Tomorrow.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.